Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States now owes over $38 trillion, the highest figure in its history. The European Union carries around $14 trillion, Japan almost $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia or export powerhouses like Germany and China all owe enormous sums. But here's the paradox. If everybody owes money, who exactly is owed? Welcome to the Wealth Timeline, where we uncover how money, power, and history are woven together to shape the world we live in. To understand debt's ultimate master, you must first understand the world that created it. Just 6 months before the deadliest war in human history. In March 1939, something extraordinary happened in the vaults beneath Threadneedle Street. The Bank of England, guardian of the British Empire's wealth, quietly transferred £5.6 million in gold to Nazi Germany. Not secretly, not illegally, but openly, deliberately, and with the full knowledge of the British Chancellor. The gold belonged to Czechoslovakia, a democratic nation that German troops had invaded just days earlier at gunpoint. Yet when officials pressured the Czechoslovak National Bank directors to sign a transfer order, the machinery of international finance clicked into motion without hesitation. The request went to a bank most people have never heard of, a bank that exists to this day, a bank that survived a world war, multiple global crises, and a vote by 44 nations to abolish it. Its name, the Bank for International Settlements. Today, global debt exceeds $323 trillion. Governments alone owe $111 trillion, a number that has nearly doubled in just 15 years. Central banks coordinate policy through secretive meetings in Basel, Switzerland, and the institution at the center of it all is the same. One that facilitated that gold transfer in 1939. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented, verified, uncomfortable history of debt's ultimate master, the institution that has quietly shaped global finance for nearly a century. And the question nobody wants to answer is this: who really controls the world's money, and what do they want? In 1918, the guns of World War I fell silent across Europe. 4 empires had collapsed. 10 million soldiers lay dead. The victors faced an impossible question. Who would pay for the devastation? The answer came at Versailles in 1919, Germany. The defeated nation would bear the financial burden through reparations payments so enormous that economists warned they would destabilize not just Germany, but the entire continent. One British economist at the Paris Peace Conference predicted that forcing such crushing terms on Germany would trigger economic chaos, political extremism, and eventually, another war. His name was John Maynard Keynes. He resigned in protest, and within 2 decades, every one of his warnings came true. But here's what the history books often miss. The same financial machinery designed to extract those reparations would become something far more permanent. Something that would outlive the Treaty of Versailles, to outlive Nazi Germany, to outlive the Cold War, and today manages more wealth than most nations on Earth. The question is, how did a reparations mechanism transform into the world's most powerful financial institution? As by 1929, Germany was drowning. The reparations burden, combined with the global economic slowdown, had pushed the Weimar Republic to the breaking point. American investment, which had been propping up German payments, began to evaporate as Wall Street collapsed. Bankers and diplomats scrambled to salvage the situation. At the Young Conference in 1929, a Belgian delegate named Emile Franqui proposed a novel solution: create a permanent institution to administer Germany's Pimenta settlement organization that would stand above national politics. The very next day, Hjalmar Schacht, president of the German Reichsbank, endorsed the idea. So did the American delegation, eager to protect U.S. investments in German industry. On January 20th, 1930, representatives from Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland signed the founding charter of the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. The BIS would collect, administer, and distribute Germany's reparation payments, would provide banking services to central banks, and crucially, it would operate outside the control of any single government. Its first president was an American banker named Gates Magera. Its board included representatives from central banks that would soon be at war with one another. The BIS opened for business on May 17, 1930. just as the Great Depression was beginning to devour the global economy. Within 2 years, the reparations system collapsed entirely. Germany stopped paying. The purpose for which the BIS was created had vanished, but the institution itself, it was just getting started, because the bankers who created it had built something more valuable than a reparations mechanism. They had built a permanent forum for central bank cooperation, a place where monetary authorities could coordinate policy away from democratic oversight. And that forum would prove its usefulness in ways no one anticipated. Throughout the 1930s, as fascism spread across Europe and the world slid toward another catastrophe, the BIS continued its work in Basel. Its meetings brought together central bankers from nations that were increasingly hostile to one another. Nazi officials sat across the table from British and French representatives. The bank's charter guaranteed neutrality and neutrality. In the language of finance, meant continuing business regardless of which governments were in power. By 1939, the BIS had become something unique in global finance, an institution that answered to no electorate, followed no national interest, and operated according to its own internal logic. When German troops invaded Czechoslovakia in March 1939, the Czechoslovak government had already deposited 23 tons of gold with the BIS for safekeeping, convinced it would be beyond Nazi reach. They were wrong. Days after the invasion, under duress, Czech bank officials signed a transfer order, moving their gold reserves to a Reichsbank account. The BIS forwarded the request to the Bank of England, which held the physical gold in its vaults.
Ow.
Despite the British government's attempt to freeze Czech assets, the transfer proceeded. Bank of England Governor Montague, Norman himself a BIS director, argued that the bank was merely fulfilling its contractual obligations to a customer. When the British Chancellor pressed Norman on whether the Bank of England still held Czech gold, Norman's reply was evasive. He pointed out that the bank held gold from time to time for the BIS and had no knowledge whether it was their own property or that of their customers. The gold was transferred. Some of it was sold in London. Proceeds helped finance Germany's war machine. And yet, remarkably, the scandal did not destroy the BIS. The institution survived because it served a purpose that transcended any single conflict. It provided a space where central bankers could speak to one another even when their governments could not. That usefulness would prove decisive when, 5 years later, the victorious Allies gathered to design the post-war financial order. In July 1944, as Allied forces fought their way across Normandy, 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission, to design a new international monetary system that would prevent another depression, another war, another catastrophe. The conference created two institutions that would reshape global finance: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. But there was a third item on the agenda, one that has largely been forgotten. Norway's delegation introduced a resolution calling for the immediate liquidation of the Bank for International Settlements. Their evidence: the BIS had facilitated Nazi looting of occupied Europe. Its American president, Thomas McKittrick, had maintained close relationships with German officials throughout the war. Its neutrality was a facade that had enabled genocide. U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau supported the resolution. So did the American and Soviet delegations. The motion passed without objection in Commission 3 and was adopted as part of the final act of the Bretton Woods Conference. The BIS, it seemed, was finished. But then something curious happened. John Maynard Keynes, the same economist who had warned against the Versailles reparations, now leading Britain's delegation, intervened to delay the dissolution. European central bankers lobbied quietly behind the scenes. In April 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt died. The officials most hostile to the BIS left the Treasury. And by 1948, the liquidation resolution had been quietly shelved. The BIS survived. More than that, it thrived. Why? Because the same characteristics that made it controversial during wartime made it invaluable during peace. Its independence from government control, its expertise in monetary coordination, its ability to facilitate cooperation between nations that could not cooperate openly. The institution that was supposed to be abolished became instead the architect of post-war monetary order. In the decades following Bretton Woods, the BIS transformed itself from a wartime pariah into the central node of global financial governance. During the 1950s, it served as the technical agent for the European Payments Union, helping restore currency convertibility across war-ravaged Europe. During the 1960s, it coordinated central bank responses to currency crises that threatened the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates. When that system collapsed in 1971, after the United States unilaterally suspended dollar-gold convertibility, the BIS was there to pick up the pieces. In 1974, following the failures of several internationally active banks, the central bank governors of the G10 nations established the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. Its secretariat, located at the BIS, the Basel Committee's work produced the Basel Accords, a series of international banking regulations that would reshape how banks around the world manage risk and capital. Basel I, adopted in 1988, established minimum capital requirements for banks, rules that were credited with stabilizing the global banking system for a generation. Basel II, finalized in 2004, introduced more sophisticated risk measurements. Its implementation in the United States coincided almost exactly with the 2008 financial crisis. Basel III, developed in response to that crisis, tightened requirements further. Its implementation continues today. Through these accords, the BIS became something it had never been before, a global regulatory standard setter, not through democratic mandate, but through the collective agreement of central bankers who met regularly in its tower overlooking the Rhine. The institution that once transferred Czech gold to the Nazis now shapes the rules governing trillions of dollars in global banking today. The Bank for International Settlements operates from a distinctive cylindrical tower in Basel 18 stories, above ground for below. Its membership has expanded from the original European founders to 63 central banks, representing countries that account for approximately 95% of global GDP. But the BIS is not the only legacy of the debt systems born in the early 20th century. Global public debt reached $111 trillion in 2025, approximately 95% of world GDP. The United States alone carries $38 trillion in government debt. China holds $18.7 trillion. Japan's debt exceeds 230% of its GDP, the highest ratio among major economies. Interest payments on this debt now consume more government resources in many countries than spending on education or healthcare. According to UN data, 3.4 billion people live in nations where interest payments exceed funding for schools or hospitals. The sovereign debt crises that have erupted in recent decades, Argentina's default in 2001, the Eurozone crisis that began in 2009, Greece's prolonged agony, all follow patterns that would have been familiar to the architects of the BIS. Crushing debt burdens, political instability, the intervention of international institutions operating beyond democratic control, the prioritization of creditor interests over domestic populations, and always, at the center of the response, coordination among central banks, often facilitated through Basel. When the 2008 financial crisis threatened to collapse the global banking system, central banks coordinated their response through networks that traced directly back to BIS meetings. Currency swap lines established between major central banks prevented a liquidity crisis from becoming a total meltdown. When COVID-19 triggered the largest peacetime borrowing spree in history, those same mechanisms activated again. Central banks flooded the global economy with trillions in emergency liquidity. Governments borrowed without apparent limit. The debt, of course, remains. And the institutions that manage it, the BIS, the Basel Committee, the network of central banks that coordinate through Basel, continue to operate largely outside public view. It's not because they are hidden, because most people have never been taught to look. So what have we learned from this hidden chapter of financial history? First, the institutions that govern global finance were not designed for democratic accountability. They were designed for efficiency, coordination, and stability values that sometimes conflict with transparency and popular control. The BIS survived the Nazi gold scandal, the Bretton Woods abolition vote, and decades of criticism because it served a function that powerful actors valued. That function, central bank coordination beyond political interference, remains its core purpose today. Second, debt is not merely a financial instrument. It is a mechanism of power, from German reparations to Greek austerity. from Argentina's default to the current global debt mountain. The question of who owes what to whom has shaped nations, toppled governments, and determined the life chances of billions. The institutions that administered these debts that set the rules, coordinate the responses, manage the crisis wield influence that rivals any elected government. Yet most citizens could not name them. Third, the past is never truly past. The BIS that transferred Czech gold in 1939 is the same institution that helps coordinate global monetary policy today. The debt systems established after World War I evolved into the frameworks that govern our current financial order. The decisions made in Basel boardrooms ripple outward to affect interest rates, bank lending, and government budgets around the world. Understanding this history is not an exercise in nostalgia. It is essential for comprehending how power actually operates in the modern world. Because in the realm of wealth and power, history never ends, just changes hands. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of financial history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Wealth Timeline, and turn on the bell icon because the next story might just rewrite what you thought you knew about power.